Hello. Hopefully you are here for a talk entitled The Impact of AI, Co-Pilot and Large Language Models on the Future of Legal Work. If you are, you're in the right place. If you're not, you're still in the right place because I think it's going to be really interesting and you're going to want to stick around anyway. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon to everyone here in the room at Nashville, and good morning, afternoon, good evening, as appropriate to everyone watching online. Thank you for being here, both in person and virtually, and sharing your time and your thoughts with us. It's really meaningful. I very much appreciate it. And I really hope you're enjoying the first day of the conference so far. My name is Tom Heinen. I'm one of the directors of engineering here at Clio. I've worked in the technology industry for a little over a decade at this point, and I've seen a reasonable share of change in that time. But the rise of generative AI this year, particularly through large language models, is one of the more important developments I've seen in quite some time. And that's why I'm really excited to host our speaker, Stephen Kaufman, here today, to hear a little bit more about his thoughts of the evolving AI landscape and how it might impact the legal industry. So as chief architect in Microsoft Customer Success Unit team, Stephen Kaufman brings over 30 years of consulting experience across some of our largest enterprise customers. He's a very respected leader in the area of AI and the future of AI. He's appeared in a variety of industry conferences nationally and internationally over the years. And he's been discussing artificial intelligence, application development, integration, and cloud computing strategies, as well as a variety of related topics. He's a published author of 3 books and a number of white papers and other content. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Stephen Kaufman.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining. We have a very, very exciting topic to talk about today. And we're going to talk about the impact. We're going to talk about technology. We're going to talk about large language models. Now, it is going to be interactive. I'm going to ask you guys questions. There are going to be a couple things that we talk about. And one of them, I'm going to just run right past that one. We've got an hour and a lot of content. So we'll talk a little bit about the history. How did we get here? Were we prepared? Are we prepared? What are some of the limitations and risks that we have with the technology? What are some of the benefits? How do we use it? How should we use it? What are some of the things that we should be putting in place to govern how we use it? What does it mean for the future of work? What does that really mean for us? And then, of course, I'll talk about Co-Pilot, and I'll talk about what does this mean for the future? What are we looking at? What are some of the things that different vendors are looking at? How do we start to incorporate this? So first, let's start talking about the history. And when we think about the history, we're going to go way back. Or more way back. There we go. Yeah, you can't have a presentation without a little bit of a hiccup, right? So back in the 1950s, we had this thing called artificial intelligence. And it was all about how can we figure out, how do we make machines do the things that we do as people? And then we got into machine learning. And machine learning was all about how do we learn from the data? What do we do with that information? How do we start to make decisions? Right? So all of these things have been building on top of all of this. And then finally, we get to generative AI. And generative AI is really about how do we take all of this and make it so that we essentially give prompts and we get responses and we can use it, and it's straightforward. So that's really how we got to where we are now. So while some of this may have been kind of a crazy 10 months, right? If we think back to last December when a lot of this was announced and we started hearing all of this in the news, and of course, everything in the news was all about this is the greatest thing in the world, this is the worst thing in the world. We've had progress, it's faster, right? There are all of these different types of things that we've been hearing in the news. This is just a glimpse of a few of them. And the reason that I picked these were because there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of capabilities, but there's a lot of hype. And so part of what we're going to talk about is what are those limitations and benefits? What's the reality? What's the hype? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you guys a question. So within your organizations, have your organizations banned GPT and generative AI? Show of hands. Anybody banning it? Okay, that's great. The lights are so bright I actually can barely see everybody. Okay, is your organization investigating use cases for generative AI? Wonderful. Okay, fantastic. And within your organizations, how many are actually using generative AI currently in legal work? Wonderful. Okay, fantastic. So we're going to talk about a number of these different things, but I want to get into a little bit of the background, and I'm not going to read these. I'll let you guys read. But there's a number of things that I'm going to call out across a number of different slides. And one is that when we think about AI, and especially when we think about GPT, right? GPT, the T stands for transformer, and what that is a new way of getting a response in and giving us information back. It's generating a response for us. Doesn't work like a search engine. It's not going out there and grabbing information off the internet. It's not going out there and taking paragraphs and bringing that back and giving that back to us. It's actually generating output. And what it does is the model takes the prompt, splits it up, looks at it, and then essentially gives us back content. I'm not going to talk about how it does that or what it does, but the idea is that very, very efficiently, it can do a tremendous amount of activities for us. And so that might be things like summarization. It might be things like content generation. And we'll get into use cases, and I'll talk about more of those types of things. But what it does is it is trained, these large language models are trained on a huge data set. Now, in the past, if we wanted to use this technology, if we wanted to use large language models, if we wanted to use machine learning, typically what we needed to do is we needed to go get a large amount of data to train the model. But before we did that, we had to create a model. And then we had to figure out what is it that we're trying to answer? What is it we're trying to do with that model? Then we would take the large amount of data, we would train it, we would test it, we'd then be able to use it. So when we think about where we are today with things like GPT, all of that's been done for us. Right? The model's been created. The amount of data has already been collected. It's been tuned. It's been tested. We start interacting with it. And so all of the heavy lifting has been done. So if we think about that history, when we think about the background, that's why we had this inflection point back in December, January, where all of a sudden it blew up. And it blew up because it was so easy to use. So that was a big piece. The other piece is that we had options. There are a number of different models that are part of the technology. So when we think about how do we use the technology, it really is about the technology of the large language model and then the model families within the large language model. And each one of them does things a little bit differently. So what we're trying to get to by using these is that I can ask a question and I can get a response back. So essentially that's what we're doing here is almost any question asked, we can provide an answer in a well-structured sentence. And so what that does is it makes it so that English is now the new programming language. And so that opens up the field to a lot more people. So that's the other part of the power of the large language model. Now, I'm going to touch on one of the pieces that we'll touch a lot more on, and that is that the response can be creative, or it can be concise, it can be thought-provoking. A well-defined prompt makes all the difference in the world. So what that means is that if I ask it a question and I'm not specific, I'm going to get a response, but that response isn't necessarily going to be specific. And so it's up to us and how we interact with it that dictates the response or the answer that we get back. Now, the other piece is the way that we use the technology. There are going to be people who want a very creative response. And we can do that, right? If we're writing a story, if we're writing a song, if we're writing a book, write a children's book, or you name it, and I want it to be more creative, the technology will do that. If I'm using it in business, that's not good. And so then I need to be more concise with my prompts. I need to be more concise with the way that we set the parameters for the technology so that I can tell it that, hey, we don't want you to be creative. And so those are some of the things that we have the ability to set and the ability to tune. But the history is still important because understanding how we got here is as important as how we use it. And the reason is because of the hype. None of this is new, right? I laid out how long this has been going on. But the other part of this is that when we think about GPT, right now the current version of GPT is 4.0. So that means there's been that many versions previous to this. It wasn't really until GPT-3 came out that it started to be able to do things at the level that we do things. And what I mean by that is you hear stories about people who have used this to take tests. And they passed the tests. That started about the 3.0 timeframe. Before that, the training was there was a lot of capabilities, but it wasn't really until 3.0 came out. Then there was 3.5, 3.5 Turbo, 4.0. We don't have to get into each of the specifics, but the idea is that we keep building. It gets stronger, it gets more capable, it gets more powerful. So that's the other piece that I want to make sure as we walk away from today is that this isn't just a flash in the pan. This isn't something that has just happened over the last 10 months. This has been something that's been evolving. So where are we going? Where are we evolving to? So part of this, and the reason I'm talking about 2 and 3, GPT-2 and GPT-3, is because one of the things that I want to make sure that we understand is that when we think about the leap between GPT-2 and GPT-3, not only were the models able to learn entirely new behaviors, so that's impressive, that's important, but it was able to do that based on showing it new data, not on additional programming. So as we think about where we're going from 3 to 4, again, more ability to learn, more ability to do new things. Now, the other part is that it's multi-purpose. So what that means is that I can learn commands not explicitly designed in the code. I can do things through text, I can do things through image. And whether I'm giving it an image or I'm giving it text, whether it's giving me back text or it's giving me back an image, or it might be giving me back voice, those are all capabilities. So part of when we think about what's the future, how do we use this technology, we have to be thinking about what do we do with images, what do we do with text, what do we do with voice. Okay, so one more poll question. When we look at the AI revolution, how does it make you feel? Right? Based on what you know right now, how many people are scared of the AI revolution? Okay, I got a couple hands. Okay. How many people are ambivalent? It's just new technology. We've been here before. Okay, got a couple more hands. How about optimistic? How many people are optimistic about this? Wow, fantastic. Okay, love it. And how many people are delighted? It's exactly what you've been waiting for. Oh, I got a couple people with 2 hands up, left and right hand. Okay, this is fantastic. I love it. Okay, now, the thing is that this technology is a disruptor. And depending on how you feel about disrupting technology and what that means for your organization, what it means for the way that you do work, you could actually be a little bit of all of those. And that's okay. It's actually good. And the reason that I say that it's actually good is because there are things that we should be, I'm not going to say scared, concerned about, right? That we should be planning, that we should be thinking about how we're going to use the technology, that we should start to put in some controls, some guidance. But then on the other end, we should be delighted because the things that this technology can do enhance the things that we're already doing. And it's that enhancement where the power really is. And so we'll talk about all of that. But I want to start out, because there is so much hype about the technology, because so many people think that it can do everything, anything. Let's talk about some of the limitations. Let's talk about some of the risks. So if we start out with the limitations, some of it, and I'll just start at the top real quickly, is that people can think that, hey, this is just oversimplified. It can do everything. It can do anything. It should do anything. But that's not the case, right? So we have to be careful of that. We also have to be careful of something called hallucinations. Now, what's a hallucination? Because the model itself can be creative, and I can give it a prompt, and I can have that prompt give me back responses, the information that it gives me back may or may not be accurate. So every time that we use this technology, we need to have somebody reviewing the output. 100% of the time. Whenever we use this technology, a human has to be in the loop. We have to validate what comes out of the model. We have to validate that it's, number one, that it's correct, but number two, that it's in the style and the voice that we want it. It might be great at giving us back information, but we need to go and make sure that that's the way that we want it said. And so there's always has to be a human in the loop. The other limitation, and we'll talk about some of these things around security and bias, privacy, those are going to be essential. So depending on what large language model we're going with, depending on what technology we're going with, we have to make sure that we understand the terms of use. We have to make sure that we understand what's happening with security. We have to know, do we have the ability to have things like role-based security as to who can use the technology, but also security in terms of our data and privacy. What things do I send to the large language model and make sure that that data isn't being used for testing, isn't being used for anything else, that that data belongs to you, stays in your environment, and is just used by the model to give you the response back. So that's an important piece as you're trying to pick out which model you're going to use, which technology you're going to use. The other is transparency and explainability. Can we monitor everything that's happening with the engine? Can we monitor everything that's happening with our interactions with that? Whether it's us personally interacting with something like ChatGPT, or we're using the GPT technology to put into our solutions or into our applications that we're making available to customers, right? Depending on what your business model is. The other is transparency and explainability. There are some organizations that say, hey, if GPT helped me write this report, do I list at the bottom of my report that that was one of the co-authors? Or do we not? How transparent are we going to be? Right, and that comes back to the governance, it comes back to policy, it comes back to explainability. The other is legal risk. And I'm jumping around on a couple of these, and I'm going to just pick out a few. But the legal risk, and we've heard some of the stories about there was a lawyer that used this, got results back, it quoted cases that weren't real cases. So there's some legal risk. We have to be careful with what comes out of it, and this is why I started off by saying that a human needs to be in the mix. We need to check on everything that it sends us back. But it's up to you, to your organizations, as to what the legal risk is and how you're going to use the technology. Can we copyright what comes out of it? I'd mentioned images. One of the technologies called DALL-E, D-A-L-L-E, lets me put in a response in text, and it feeds me back an image. And it's extremely powerful. It's actually pretty amazing. But the image that I get back, is that my image? Can I copyright it? What happens if I'm using that within my organization? So those are things that are being talked about right now in the legal world around who owns it. Can it be copyrighted? So those are some of the things that are still going on. Now, with all of those limitations, and the reason that I start with limitations first is because I want us going in really clear-minded about the technology, really clear-minded about the things that we have to be thinking about. Because when we think about the benefits, when we think about the risks, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the risks in a second, there's a balance. Where do we use it and how do we use it? So when we think about the risks, there's a number of different things we have to think about. So I've talked about copywriting. That's going to be important. How much does it cost? Is that a risk? How much time does it save us in the work that we're doing? And if we're billing by the hour, is that a risk? Does that change our model? So we have to think about the business risk as well as the technology risk. We have to think about how is it going to be used? How much power do we give to everybody in the organization? And then how do they use it? And as they use it, do we monitor how they use it? And so what do we do there in terms of people who may want to use it for things that, yes, technically it can do, but we don't want that done that way in the business. The last one, I think, is a risk and a benefit. And here's why. It requires a unique set of skills. Maybe. One of the things that I said earlier is that English is the new programming language. We all have that skill. So really, where this comes in as a risk and a benefit is that it becomes so easy to use that everybody can use it. And so that's why we have to be careful how we use it. But the unique set of skills is also a benefit. Because the opportunity that we have for the enhancements that it gives us are incredible. And so part of those things really come down to How do we want to use it? What are the policies? What are the procedures around the use? And I talk about this with everybody, every industry. Every industry needs to have policies and procedures around how this is used. The other thing we need to do is we need to look at how we have our rules of conduct set up. Do we need to update those? And then we need to talk about bias. So one of the things that I didn't talk about in one of the other slides was bias. Is that a concern that everybody has in here? Has everybody heard about the fact that these might be biased? Okay, so let's talk about bias for a second. Because bias means different things depending on who, on where. So if we look at how the model was trained, right? I had talked about the fact that for these models to work, we have to have a large data set. We go and we create a model. We load the data into the model. We train it. We tune it. We test it. And then we can start to use it. So with a model like GPT, it was trained on about 45 terabytes of data from the internet. So a huge data set. Now, the data that was selected, or the data that was available, typically was English language, North America, Europe. It was essentially a tremendous amount of data. But the fact that that data was from those regions in that language may or may not constitute a bias. And so depending on where we're using the technology, what prompts we're giving it, we may or may not get certain information back. And so when we think about bias, we have to think about what does that mean for how we're going to use it. So that's the piece that I want you guys to be thinking about when we think about how do we understand the risk of the bias. But when I talk about the fact that there's benefits, there's as many benefits. In fact, let's go to the next slide. Maybe, there we go. When we think about the benefits, increased efficiency, absolutely. Think about the things that we do every single day. What are those activities that are mundane, that we do over and over? What are those activities that we are doing where maybe if we had an assistant helping us, we'd be more productive? That's the idea of how this can be more efficient for us. And I'll give some examples and things like that. But things around improved outcomes. How many of us, when we're talking in a group, oh, that's right, I didn't think about that. Or, oh, you had a great idea. Okay, let me go research that. Let me go look into that. Oh, you brought up something that I hadn't thought about. Well, what if that is my interaction with this technology? I personally use this technology. I ask it all kinds of questions. I use it for research. I use it as a sounding board. I'll give it prompts and I'll ask it for response back. Because I want to see what does it know? What does it think? Not think, but what ideas can it give me back that I hadn't thought about? So that's how I use it. That's one of the reasons, or one of the options, ideas. The other, I can make a lot of errors. This helps me with that. It helps me with translation. So there's things like that that it gives me the ability to do. The other is really the creativity, maybe not, depends. But the pace of work, the things that I'm able to do because I let the technology help me do that, it's made me more efficient. And so that's where we start to look at what some of these use cases are. We'll get into some of the eliminating of drudge work, but really, when we think about the benefits, we're really just kind of beginning. And all of us in this room are going to have different ideas of how we use this. How could we use this within our organization? How could we use this within our daily life? And those are some of the things that I want you to be thinking about as I continue on with some of these slides. How might you use this technology? Or how might you expand how you're already using the technology? So some of the things are freeing up more time. What can I have the system do for me that I wasn't before? How can I be doing research? What research should I be doing? What information can I be interacting with the system on? The other is, what are some of the things that I spend a lot of time reading that maybe if I had a summary, I don't necessarily need to read the entire thing, but I need to know what it says. I need to get a general idea of what it is. This technology can do summarizations extremely well. And so even something simple like that, I can get an efficiency from. So I'm going to do another poll. For AI and large language models, how many people think that it should not be used by lawyers? Interesting. Okay, so not a single hand that I see. Okay. How many people think that it can be used by lawyers, but not for legal work? Wow. Okay. Also no hands. Okay. Can be used for legal client work if used properly. Wonderful. Okay. A lot of hands. And how many can be used for legal client work if the client opts in? Doesn't have to be. Okay, one hand. Okay, perfect. Two hands. So the reason that I ask this question is because, again, it comes back to how do we use the technology? And what are people's feelings about the technology? What are people's feelings about how we're going to make policy around this? And there are some people that I talk to that say it shouldn't be used. We're banning it. And I've talked to a number of law firms that have started that way, but then they come back and now they're starting to use it. And then I get law firms and I get other companies that say, you know what? We're going to use it, but we're going to attribute the fact that we use this technology. Or we're going to ask clients to opt in. And if they opt in, then we can use the technology. It's really about how we start to use it and interact with our customers and figure out what works for us and what makes sense. Now, earlier I had talked about the fact that the technology can do amazing things. It's gaining in its capabilities. People are using it to create exams or to take exams. People are also using it to create papers and other things. And sorry for the way that this shows up here. I see that the red is very difficult to read on the black background. But what this is saying is that when we think about the power, the capability of the technology, this technology has already been used to take law school exams. It's passed the bar exam. I mean, that's pretty amazing just right there. Now, does that mean that it knows how to use the knowledge that everybody in this room has gained? No. But it does know and has been trained on such a vast amount of data that as you ask it the question, the prompt, it can respond back appropriately and in most cases correctly. So what that means is that we now have to think about how do we start to utilize the technology? How do we start to take something that's this powerful and incorporate it into what we do? And so that's really where we get into the future of work. So what we get into is to, when I talk about the fact that this is a disruptive technology, what do we use it for? And do we want to be early adopters? Do we want to be playing catch up? Are there already organizations that are out there incorporating this? So those are some of the things that I want to talk about when I think about the future of work and some of the use cases. And when I asked you guys to think about what are some of those things that you do today that you either interact with this technology already or would like to be interacting with this technology. Some of the things that we can do, and again, I'm not going to read all of this to you, but I'm going to pick on a couple. But we can actually have it draft documents for us. Now, it might not draft the entire document. We might not want it to. But how much more efficient would we be able to be if we could say, you know what? Here is the outline of the document that I want you to start with. I have writer's block. I'm looking at a blank document. I have to start typing a report. I know approximately what things I need in this report, what things I need in this document. But what if it could get me over that writer's block and start to draft that document for me? Those are some of the types of things where I talk about efficiency and what are some of those things that really are easy to incorporate. So I picked that one for drafting and summarization. I talked about summarizing content before. But the other thing is, so I can summarize legal content, but I want to pick on the query of data, the middle section, second one in the middle. I want to pick on that one real quickly because one of the things that we think about when we think about this technology is that I'm going to open up a window, I'm going to type in a prompt, I'm going to get a response. But that's not the only thing that we can do. The other thing that we can do is we can take corporate data securely, put that within your environment, and have that alongside the large language model, not become part of it, but have that alongside of it. And so now I can go into the large language model and I can ask it a question that securely, privately, accesses information and returns it back to me. So there's a customer that I was talking about that was looking at doing this with emails. They're looking at emails from across their entire company. And again, they've got certain privacy walls and other things like that that they have to be thinking about. But if we just take a look at it from a privacy or from a technology perspective for a moment, one of the things that they were doing was taking a look at their vast array of emails and be able to do queries against the data that's in those emails. Let me ask it a question, get a response back. Now, they group those into very specific scoping. So when we think about security, when we think about all of the different things that have to sit on top of that, that has to be factored in. But that's the type of an example where I have the ability to go query data. The other is if I don't want to use my corporate information, or I don't want to have those sitting side by side, what public data is already out there? What public data is out there about companies that we work with, about different information that helps me with my analytics, with my reports, with my research? So that's that section of just drafting and summaries. When we think about retrieval and classification, I can use it to classify all kinds of data. Go find me similar data. Go find me similar information. Go compare something that I'm dealing with to what might already be out there. So we've got a lot of capabilities that way as well. With advising, if we think about risk mitigation and advising, I've got a company that I'm working with right now that says, okay, we already know within certain industry what risks we're dealing with, but I want to go use the large language model to have it provide additional risks that maybe we haven't thought about. Or give it a prompt that gives it some classification, some other information, and have it come back with risks. And so again, it's that research, it's that back and forth with the system to do that interaction, to give me more information than maybe what I might have used or what I might have been thinking about. So when we think about other use cases, and I'm going to go through quite a few use cases here because I really want you guys, when you leave here, to be thinking about all of the different ways that you might interact with the system. And whether it comes to fruition or not, that's up to you. But I want you guys to be thinking about what are some of the options. So when we think about the capabilities and use cases, I might want to use it to extract insights. I might give it a whole bunch of data and ask it to come up with an analysis. Excuse me. I might be doing some research, and I need to have it help me fill in some of that research, fill in some of the information, fill in some of the background. I might have it draft claims. I might have it do language translation. There's a couple other things that are interesting in here. I've got things in here like code refactoring, comments from code. So this isn't just about us as an end user. This isn't just about us as somebody trying to write emails, trying to write reports. I haven't even talked about emails. Let's talk about that for a second too. Because I can give it examples of emails, and I can have it write emails based on the example that I gave it so that it follows the same voice, the same tone, the same style. But when I have things here from comments from code, code refactoring, a lot of our organizations have development activities. We're writing applications for our teams. Or we've merged, or we're helping our customers do mergers. And now we've got to look at systems. And whether it's our own systems, their systems, what I'm driving at is that if we're creating custom applications, I can have this technology help me write those applications. I can have it help me code. I can give it blocks of code, and I can have it tell me back in English what the code does. I can give it a block of code, and I can have it write comments for that code, so that if I need to make it more maintainable for the future. So that's the other side of this. It isn't just help me write a report, help me write an email, help me synthesize what's already there and summarize it. So I get a lot of power from here. Now, if we kind of dive from this and we dive into more of the legal use cases, this is essentially just a quick view of different things that we can be doing that are specific legal use cases. And whether we're in real estate, we're in securities, contracting, tax, these are some of the areas that it can help us in. And so it might be interpretation. It might be verification. It might be research. It might be that I need to make sure that we follow the same steps. So if I am trying to get FDA approval, as an example, and I need to figure out what are the steps to be able to do that, to be able to apply, I can go ask this and it'll tell me every single step that I need to go do. Because that information was part of that 45 terabytes that the system was trained on. It was public information. So that's there. I can ask it a question, it's going to give me back that answer. So earlier in the talk, I talked about the fact that this technology is not like a search engine. right? So I gave the example of how do I get the steps to go do something? If I go out to a search engine, I might be able to do the exact same thing, right? What are the steps to be able to do X? And it will give me a list of all the websites. I've got to go click on the website. I got to go out to that, follow that link, go out to the website, excuse me. Then I've got to go read all the information. And maybe the information is right at the top of that page when I go click on the URL. Maybe there's all kinds of text and I've got to scroll down. When I come into the large language model and I ask it to do that exact same thing, it's going to give me the steps, the 5 steps, 12 steps, 18 steps, whatever number of steps it is, because that's specifically what I asked for. And that's one of the big differences. So some of the other things, based on what I've got as examples here, and these are, again, just examples, employee handbooks. You guys might look at that and say, okay, it's going to help me create an employee handbook? Maybe. But I would say even more importantly than that, you can create a chatbot with this technology that utilizes your existing employee handbook and makes it so that people can start asking questions against the handbook to get information that maybe they either otherwise didn't know, or were asking other people, or were asking HR about, or were asking whoever. And so now I can start to use this technology with other components and start to build very easy, powerful solutions. And so it isn't just about what the model was trained with. It's now about how do I use these things to solve the business problems. So, lots of different use cases, lots of different ideas. But how do we get started? And really, it's all about taking a look at how do we use it. Within your organization, how are you thinking of using it? What's the right model? What guardrails are you going to put in place? What policies are you going to put in place? Who can use it? Can everybody use it? Do I already have policies in place, but I have to reevaluate them? And what I would say, do something. Do something with this. If we do nothing and we kick the can down the road, and we say, you know what, we're going to revisit it in a month, in 6 months, in a year, and we do nothing, people within the organization will start to use this. Whether they use it at home, whether they create their own accounts with some of the different providers, they will use it. They're using it now. So it's really about how do we make sure that we're aligning all of the things that this technology can do with our policies, making sure that we have a plan for how it's going to be used, and how is it going to be used to benefit what we do day in and day out, what we're doing with our customers, what we're doing for the company. So that's why I say do something instead of nothing. And again, for each of you, that do something might be a small thing, it might be a big thing, but do something. So part of this talk was to talk about the history, to talk about large language models, to talk about what some of the hype, some of the risks, some of the benefits. But the other part is, what's next? So I've said do something. So what are we doing? So one of the things that we're doing is we're taking this technology and incorporating it into solutions. And those solutions we're calling Co-Pilot. So I want to talk for a few minutes about our vision. Not trying to sell anything, not a plug. It's more about how do we see the use of the AI technology in tools that we're using every single day. So when we look at it, one of the things that we look at is we say, okay, so if we think about Word, I need to write a document. So what happens if I could ask the system, write me a report, however many pages, but I want you to take data out of a different document, and I want you to take some numbers out of a spreadsheet. And I want you to go create a 2-page document for me. And I've got to give it some additional information, but now it can create that document for me. Now, what I said earlier is we always have to have a human in the loop. So I still have to go back and read what it said, but how much more efficient are we when I can take a look at text and say, oh, it didn't talk about this and it didn't include this. And oh, I want to change this to have more information. And now all of a sudden, instead of a blank document and I'm trying to write and I'm trying to put my thoughts together, now I'm editing and I'm adding and I'm changing. And now I'm much more productive. So that's one of the things that we're looking at around how do we use this technology. How do we make it so that you are far more efficient in the work that we're doing within this application. In PowerPoint, what if I could come in and say, okay, I need you to make me 5 slides, and I want you to base this 5 slides off data that's in this document that I have access to, right? That's an important piece. I don't get to base it off of information I don't have access to. But what if I could create my presentation off of document, but the data that you bring into the PowerPoint, I want you to use keywords, and I want you to go pull in pictures for me. I want you to pull in pictures using DALL-E that help with the message I'm trying to get across. Now, could I go do that today? Absolutely. Right? I can go out to a document, I can start pulling things in, I can do some of this manually, I can go out to a website, I can go download a picture, I can go import a picture, I can go resize it. PowerPoint gives me some nice things about, formatting that picture. But now it's taken me a half an hour. What if I could do it this way, and this were a couple minutes? That's the idea of the efficiency that I'm talking about. So what happens if I can do the same thing in Excel? I mean, some of us are Excel experts. Some of us use it. Some of us forget all of the different things that we can do with it, and we have to look it up every time. But what happens if I could tell it that this is what I wanted it to do, and it went and did it for me? What happens if I get a whole table of data, and I say, you know what? I want you to go break down this data. Show me sales by type, by channel. Put that on a different tab. And oh, by the way, add a graph to it. And it goes and it just does it. Right? I don't need to go do any of the math. I don't need to go do anything else. It's doing a lot of the mundane work that I used to have to do. And that's the vision behind the technology. Now, whether you use this, whether you don't use this, whether you're thinking about using it, does not matter. What I want to make sure is that as you guys are thinking about the enhancements, the creativity, the capabilities of the large language models, how do you start to utilize that? How do you utilize it within your practice? How do you utilize it within your everyday activities? How do the different vendors that you're working with incorporate some of this? Right? Those are some of the things that I want you guys to be thinking about. I had mentioned coding earlier. And one of the other things that's here is GitHub Co-Pilot. And the idea is that if I'm a developer, it helps me as well. Because now I can come in here and I can have it recommend different parts of code for me. Now, GitHub Copilot works if I'm a professional developer, right? If you've got a developer in your organization that's writing applications, but what happens if you have power users? I don't need this. I can do the same thing with the large language models. So how many of you have gone in and said, I need to create a report, or I need to create something based on some data. I'm really good at Excel, or I'm terrible at Excel, but I want to do some really interesting things. I can go into the large language model and I can say, hey, write me some code that does this visualization for me. And I can go into Excel and plug it in. And now I've gone from a power user to a power user. Right? So it gives me that capability as well. So that's why I say, look at the different use cases for the large language model. Whether you use this or not, I just want you to know that things are there. And what it really comes down to is this quote. Change is inevitable. Growth is optional. It's up to you guys. It's up to you guys how you use this, how you incorporate it. But it's an amazing technology. It's an amazing tool. And like everything else, it's not going to solve everything, but it's another tool in the toolbox. And so it's about how do we use it, where do we use it, and how do we best use it for the things that we're trying to do to make us more efficient and more capable. So with that, thank you, everyone. Hopefully this was good information. I would love to open it up for questions. I'm first going to open it up if there's anybody virtually that has questions first. Okay? Is there anybody in the room with any questions? And I can't see with the lights. Hold on. We've got somebody right here. And maybe, do you have the mic?
Yep.
Perfect. We've got somebody right here.
This is kind of outside legal, but what does the future look like for the internet? Is the internet itself going to be AI generated content in 2-3 years from now?
Good question. So hopefully everybody heard that. So what does this mean for the internet? So what I would say is that one of the amazing things about the internet is it is an amazing connector. It is amazing at information dissemination. And what I would say is AI just fits into that. We're going to see a lot more content getting created. We're already seeing blogs being written. We're seeing papers being written by people who are incorporating this technology, and again, attributing it. So I think what we're going to end up seeing is more inclusion, more abilities of the technology, more abilities of applications that we see on the web that include AI as well. Other questions? Yes. There's a lady right here. And sorry, I've got to kind of cover the...
I think this is going to have to be our last one, so you ready?
Okay, on the use of Copilot, I have used that, and it's very easy. Like your example with your prompt in Excel, it's analyzing your data.
Yeah.
How concerned do I need to be about the safety of my data when using Copilot?
Okay, great question. So the security of your data using Copilot. So specifically talking about Microsoft M365 Copilot, what it does is it sits on top of your existing security within your organization. And so if you've got all of your documents already secured using Azure Active Directory, using the graph capabilities, and I'm going to get a little bit technical, it respects and looks at all of that. So what that means is that if I don't have access to a document, this isn't going to have access to it for me as an individual user. you might have access, and you're going to be able to see it. And so it's looking and respecting at every single one of those permission attributes. One of the things that this does have us talk about, which becomes very important, is the idea of oversharing. So if you and I were on a team together, I had access, you had access, but I left the team and I went to go work on a different project. There needs to be a process to say, I no longer need access, so remove my access from the team. Because I don't want to be on the next team, be able to do a query and still get access to the documents that I had before on my previous project. And so it does require a certain amount of being careful, right? Being cognizant of who we've given access to, and not just giving access, but also taking access and managing that access. And so that's a forcing function for some of the organizations that may not necessarily do that today, but that becomes part of one of the things we talk about in every one of these implementations. Okay, with that, we are out of time. Thank you, everyone. I will stick around for a few more minutes and answer questions off to the side.